Hello and welcome to the SURE program, the Student Undergraduate Research Experience at the University of Saskatchewan. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research here at USask. And today is our presentation on how to read a journal article. Very necessary for most of us who work in academia. I'm a settler Canadian. I'm of Scottish, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Ukrainian tradition, and I am filled with gratitude to live within Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I give respect to the First Nations and Métis of this place and continually value our interconnectedness through Wekutuan. I too love this land of vast skies and tall trees, Saskatoons and blueberries, and the swift and slow waters of the Saskatchewan River. So, why are you here? That's kind of my question. So, why are you having to read journal articles? Most of us in academia, we're either doing it for one of two reasons. We need to read a whole bunch of journal articles because we're trying to feverishly to put together a paper for a class, or we're working on a research project, or perhaps we're working on an honors thesis or a graduate thesis. And so if you're reading journal articles for those reasons, then you're looking to I'd kind of go into the university library, into the system, and identify anything that's good, useful, relevant, and articles, and you're doing it fast. You're skimming, you're sorting, you're conducting a literature review. And then you'll be putting those articles together a bit like a puzzles to come up with a literature review or a synthesis. So that's probably the primary reason to be reading journal articles. But sometimes we're presenting just on one particular article. There are a number of labs across campus that do journal clubs. And we have had journal clubs attached to the SURE program in the past as well. And in those, oftentimes you're presenting just on this one article. And so you need to understand it deeply and explain it to others. Sometimes you're doing it in a tutorial presentation, a group project, or a journal club. And so this presentation kind of covers both of those, which of course are very interrelated. Um, but yeah, so for the most part, it's the one pulling together a literature review and synthesis, or you might be presenting just on one article. So there's a couple of different reasons why you might be reading it. But let's start with the first one. Let's say that you need 30 or 60 or 100 or whatever as the minimum number for your paper or your report. And so this becomes the art of skimming, reading your first key uh, let's say talent or skill that you need to work on is to read fast enough to find what you need. So what the secret to that, of course, is the more clear and focused your research question, the easier it's going to be to actually find what you need. Because otherwise, if you're studying climate change without without defining it to a particular place or a particular time period or a particular issue around climate change, so let's say drought or flood or tornadoes or whatever it is, you're going to be buried in research. So the more clear and focused your research question, the easier it's going to be to find what you're actually looking for. And then part of that is to really think about what are you searching for. And I put these four up because these are the four sort of most common things that as we're searching for journal articles, you might be looking at studying a particular theory. There might be a particular theory or a particular argument that you're going to be working within. And so you kind of need, okay, who originated that? Who was sort of the father or mother of that theory? Who was the originator of that theory? And then all the different papers that have kind of added to it, argued against it, changed it in minor ways, that kind of thing. So you might be looking at inserting your work into a particular theory. Lots of students, particularly when they're doing research in a undergraduate or graduate level research experience, oftentimes one of the things that your professor is asking you to think about is methods. And so methods, of course, it could be something simple like a particular machine in a lab and how it's used and how it generates data. Or you're taking a particular machine and you're going to use it in a different way. So then you need to find articles that use that particular machine or that particular methodology, and you're going to find different ways to use it. And it's the same in the social sciences or the humanities. So what method are you using? Are you using surveys? Are you using focus groups? Are you using one-on-one interviews? Are you a historian and going into an archive and using archival documents? So your methods do matter, but those top two, theory and methods, your search, because theories can be crossed and go across multiple kinds of Um, Disciplines, you could be looking at a fairly interdisciplinary search. Same with methodology. Someone could be using, you might be in history, but you want to look at a particular methodology that's really well used in, say, sociology or political studies. And so you might be looking sort of outside the realm of your own particular discipline, but because you're looking searching for the methodology. And so those top two tend to be a little bit more interdisciplinary in nature. Results, those are usually fairly specific to a particular discipline, that you're looking for particular research on betta fish, or you're looking for isotopes in fish, or whatever it is that you're looking for. And so you're looking for particular results. The intervention one is a little bit more odd, but that one has to do with when there's sort of an aha moment. You know, if everybody ate 10 goji berries every day, then, you know, it would cure all cancer forever. I mean, I'm making that up, but still, so those intervention papers tend to be the ones that everyone cites and really have kind of shaken up and changed the way that your discipline works. So always pay attention to those big intervention papers. And they could be theory, methods, results. It could be any one of the other three, but they tend to be something that actually change the way that your discipline has developed. So those tend to be ones to watch out for as well. So I just wanted to kind of put up that slide and remind you that you're not just searching for anything that has to do with your topic. It could be that you're looking a little bit more widespread than that because of these reasons. I wanted to draw your attention, as always, to some of the existing workshops. So coming to this workshop, if you've attended how to do a good search, comprehensive searching for your literature review, which was 2 weeks ago, or how to organize and analyze your literature review, which was last week, and you missed those seminars, I do recommend them. Both of those seminars had really, really excellent information in them, and that you can still access. And so you can watch those videos for equal sure credit. You don't necessarily have to come to the live sessions, although in the live sessions you can stop me and ask questions, so that works out well. But so, and the University of Saskatchewan Library, all of the webinars that they've done over the past year because of COVID, are all recorded and on the library workshop site as well. So if, and any of those would also qualify towards your sure credit as well. So library workshops have equal value to a sure recorded webinar, just so you know. So there are resources in place if you feel that you'd like a little bit more help sort of backing up a little bit from where we are today. So your first skill is the art of skimming. And here are your 3 steps. So you do not read the whole paper. You start with the title. Does it relate to your topic? Absolutely not. I'm studying climate change issues in Saskatchewan between 1980 and 2000. Okay, so this is, you know, something else completely. So then you can skip it. But then you're like, well, maybe it fits. So then you would go to the next one. So then you'd read the abstract. Do you think it's going to be useful? And sometimes you can tell in the abstract, and sometimes you're still not 100% sure. But if it's a solid no, it's like, nope, this is totally going in a different direction than what I thought, then you set it aside. And then, well, maybe this is, so then the third thing you do is you read the conclusion. Are their findings helpful? Do they actually match in with your research question or the things that you're interested in? If they don't, then absolutely not. Set that paper aside. But maybe if they maybe do, then you take that paper, you hook that paper, you print it up, or you save the PDF or whatever it is that you do, and you're possibly going to read it deeper. So that's the art of skimming. Start with the title. Then if you're not quite sure, then you abstract and then conclusion. And those are your quick 3 skim steps. When you're doing this, and you're going to be doing this all along, sorting between the absolutely yes, this article is clearly where I want to go with my paper, I need to read it, and then you've got the maybe papers, and then you've got the totally reject papers. But still, that sorting process is the beginning of your analysis. So which of those articles give you that clearest overview? It's like, I read the abstract, I read the conclusion, maybe I read the opening paragraph, and I actually understand what it says. Well, that means it's probably a pretty good article, so that's good. Oftentimes, particularly in the sciences, you're looking for the latest or the newest information, so you're paying attention to when it was published, the most recently published. You're also looking for something that may be more interesting or adversarial perspectives. Those are always good to add in, basically because someone else is already shaking things up, and you can just kind of follow in their footprints. Anything that it's opening the way for future research directions. Those are good ones to pay attention to as well. So this is about sorting which ones kind of end up at the top of your pile and which ones end up at the bottom of your pile. Is it useful? Does it fit my puzzle? These are the sorts of things that you're looking for. And how does it fit together? Starting to pay attention to, okay, this one fits with that one, this one fit, okay, this one's a total outlier. Do I actually want to include it? You tend, and it's always best practice, to pick more articles than you need because you can and will still reject a few. Or you'll have some that you kind of reference, but it may only end up being sort of one line in your final literature review. So yeah, you'll want a lot of more articles than what you think you need. Then the next step, of course, is reading deeper. I read all the time, usually with a cat in my lap, so that's why you got that image. The secret of analysis is two things, and they go together. It's asking questions and taking notes. I can't stress these two enough. And what this is really about your confidence as a student. Sometimes we worry, and I certainly did as well when I was a student, that what I was if I didn't understand a paper, I always assumed that it was me, that it was that I was just too dumb to understand this paper. But what I've learned through the years is that there are papers that make it through the peer review process and they're completely not understandable and they've just snowed everybody else. And so, and here they are in print. It doesn't actually make it necessarily good research or particularly well argued. So even within peer reviewed research, there's still a bit of a hierarchy. There's a reason why some of the papers are more cited. They're either more well written or easy to understand, or they're very interdisciplinary in nature. And so they're getting cited by more than one discipline. So that happens as well. But yeah, developing your confidence to ask questions and to say, I didn't understand that at all. Like, what's going on? Why is this so hard? And then the second part of that is taking notes. So as you're reading, take a lot of notes. This image comes from Raul Pacheco Vega. And if you don't follow him on social media, I do recommend it actually, or find his website. Raul Pacheco Vega is um, a researcher and he's actually Canadian trained. He got his degree at UBC, but he moved back to Mexico and he's a professor in Mexico and he does water research. But he also writes a lot on the process of doing research and he has all kinds of templates and really excellent guidelines around how to be a good researcher. And I can't recommend him enough. So you might want to write that down, Raul Pacheco Vega, and then go looking for him. All right, note taking is where your analysis truly starts to begin. In note taking, it doesn't matter to me which form you use. Some people like to take their notes in Excel and sort of do like one line on each of these papers and just create a massive Excel document. And that works out really, really well. Others are paper and pen kind of people, and that's fine. Some people like to make notations right on a particular PDF, which also works as well if you've got the capability to do that. And others will do a review right up, like to open a Word document and do a review of each individual paper. And that also works really, really well. So whichever way works best for you, go ahead and try it and try different ones. But I do encourage you to make notes on each article. This is about active reading, so asking questions. So things like the basics: who wrote it, when, why, who funded it, where was it published? So what journal did you find it in? Because that can tell you quite a bit about a paper. There's a difference between our local undergraduate student research journal, which is awesome, USurge, but there is a big difference between it and its impact factor versus, say, Science or Nature, some of these big high-end um, um, journals. So where was it published, who wrote it, when, that kind of thing. What were they responding to? So oftentimes they might have been responding to a particular call. It might be a whole journal article that's a um, has a theme, and so pay attention to that kind of thing, because if it's a thematic journal article, then you know that there's other papers in that journal that might also be really, really good for your work. So pay attention to what they were responding to. And then the actual questions about the paper. What's their research question? What was their hypothesis, or what was their thesis? if you can figure it out. Sometimes there it's kind of buried, but if you can figure it out, that's good. What methods did they use? Always write those down. And again, you've sort of got that basic learning around methodology, but methodology is simply how did they generate their data? How did they generate their information? Did they go to an archive? Did they look, what were they looking at? What were they just doing a narrative analysis? Were they just taking notes? What was their methods? What did they use? And then, of course, what were their findings? So usually that's pretty obvious in a paper. Most papers are structured in this way as well. You know, they do their opening, their literature review, and their research question, and then they talk about their methodology, and then their findings, and then their discussion, right? So usually papers are pretty easy to follow, unless it's a history paper that I wrote, in which case I'm just busy telling you a story. And then what was their conclusion? This is where you as a reader really have the most force and the most power, because this is the next question. Did it make sense, and did you believe it? So it's okay to say, you know, I don't get how they made, like, here was their methods, this is what they found, but then their conclusion just doesn't match. Like their points just don't make sense, or they've stretched it too far, or they're, you know, their conclusion is going off into left field when I think their data is going into right field. So this actually matters, and it's okay for you to write that kind of thing down. Did you believe it? Did it make sense? And then the final one is what unanswered questions do you have? So basically, are there still holes? Are there still gaps? Um, does this paper contribute to that larger conversation? And where do you think they should go next with the research, or where do you think research should go next after having read this paper? So what unanswered questions do you have? And always write those down. Um, I find that yeah. And the last thing I like to do is capture good quotes, especially for me, because I'm a historian and so I work in the narrative world all the time. So I'm always looking for those really good quotes. But it doesn't really matter if you're in the social sciences or the natural sciences or engineering. Oftentimes someone else has said it in such a way that you can't actually make it better. So you can't really paraphrase their stuff. If you actually want to quote exactly what they said, make sure that you capture it well and capture it accurately. So yeah, note taking, that's your beginning analysis. And again, how you choose to do it, whether it's pen and paper, whether it's in an Excel dump, however you choose to do it, that's entirely up to you. But it's about asking questions and sort of engaging with what you're reading. But every once in a while, we're doing this sort of stuff because we're writing for a class. And so we're very time bound, we're very limited. We've got 4 other classes that we're taking. We're doing this in a big old hurry. Well, if you are, your tips are to read just the first and the last sentence of a paragraph or a section. So just to give you that broad scale, quick reading overview of what you've got. Make sure you take the time to understand the graphs, the charts, or the images. Why are they there? What do they showcase about the data or the argument? If you understand the graphs or the charts or the images, that goes a long way. And also to watch for citations. So whoever they cited is usually your best path forward, because they've already looked at some of the best research in the area. And yeah, so looking at a journal article's citations at the end, at the back, is your best path forward for building a literature review by far. So that's where, if you're reading strategically, that's for just if you're in a hurry. That's the best way to skim read, at least for me anyway. Other ideas and practices that I find really, really helpful, particularly if I'm writing sort of an in-depth literature review, as I'm doing that sorting and thinking, I'll start doing things like making outlines or making timelines. This article was written in this time, you know, in this year. This article was written in this year. I sometimes I'll create diagrams of how all these articles fit together. Chart the begats. I don't know if any of you have any kind of biblical background, but there's whole chapters in the Bible where it's like X begat, you know, his son Y, and Y begat his son Z, and Z begat his son Q. And I say that kind of a little bit facetiously, but the same thing happens in journals. And that's going back to the previous slide where I talked about the citations at the end. So the citations are they're like your hopscotch path. You know how they got there, and yeah. So charting the, I call it sometimes a bowing to the ancestors. So figuring out what came before, what came after, what's related to what. I also like to record hunches. So I'll be reading along and sometimes I will guess before I get to the end of the journal article. I will start to make guesses on where I think they're going. And it's interesting how sometimes I'm extremely wrong and sometimes I'm dead on. But it's still a valuable practice and I do recommend it because if your hunch is correct, okay, that means that their writing is really, really skilled and you've gotten, you know, they've taken you exactly where you ought to go. If it's if you're really wrong, that also means that maybe there's something in their work that's either doesn't fit or they're just really, really innovative. So there's some interesting dynamics going on there. I always record my random thoughts, especially if I'm confused. There's a lot of question marks whenever I'm reading. And I also criticize. Nobody else is going to see these notes after all, right? And so I can criticize and I don't have to worry about hurting the author's feelings because I'm not going to send them a mean email and tell them, you know, what I actually think of their paper. But in terms of allowing myself that space to criticize, then I can come back to it later and say, no, no, I actually understand what they did and that makes sense now. Or I'll come back and say, yeah, actually that's a valid criticism. They actually did miss that step or there's a gap that they didn't address. And so writing down your criticisms is always a good thing. Synthesis, and again, I was in terms of this, I'm sort of thinking about that you're putting together a literature review as a section of a larger piece of research. But so you've done all your reading, you've done your note taking, you're starting to do, okay, yeah, this is good, but here are the holes, and then you're starting to put those pieces together, and then you end up with putting it all together. And that's part of the writing process. It's also very iterative. What you'll find is that you'll probably be writing your literature review while you're still reading journal articles. This isn't exactly a step one, step two, step three path. You'll be starting to read journal articles and then you'll be starting to write your literature review and putting things together, but you'll still be reading. And you might have to go back into whatever document you're creating, your literature review that you're writing, and make some changes within it. You're like, oh, I missed that paper and this paper fits into this part of my literature review. So it's not a straightforward process like what you see on the screen. That's a very simplified version of what actually happens. It can be pretty messy. But you've got your notes, then you compare your notes, you put it together, and you come out with a report. As long as you remember that it's less pretty than this. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second and because we're going to shift gears and talk about sort of the process of reading many articles and then the process now we're going to talk about what it takes or what it looks like to read just one article. Does anyone have any questions? We're recording, so I'm gonna keep going, and if a question shows up, I'll stop then. So this whole section is about when you have to dive deep, reading a single journal article and presenting on that article, or at least showcasing maybe to your supervisor that you really understand that article. Maybe this is a foundational article that sort of set your whole research area and your summer area of work. And so yeah, that single journal article, still the secret of analysis is taking notes and asking questions. Absolutely, that's still the secret. So going back, that whole slide around note taking is beginning analysis and all those questions. What this next section does is that it pops each of those out into its own so that we can look at it in slightly more detail, just so you know this is where we're going. So what's the larger picture and the background? So then, and this is actually one step even further out. Where does this article fit in the context of your research? Why are you reading it? Think about that. Did your professor hand it to you and say, start here? What big issue does it address? So think about some of those larger pictures and background. And as you're reading, of course, this is also where you'd write down, okay, this is who wrote it, where it was published, when, those sorts of things. Who funded it? That's also important. Rationale and objective. So why did they do this research? And what you'll find as well is that most journal articles aren't a whole research project in and of themselves. In fact, they rarely to never are. Usually a journal article, you can even see that particular research group or faculty member or researcher has a whole bunch of articles that have been sliced out of a larger research project. And so making sure that you understand not only the disciplinary context of like other people writing, but also that particular author and other things that they may have written on the same subject. Because if you read those, you'll kind of see where their work all fits together. So some of your asks there are, why did they do this research? What was the rationale? What was the big issue that they were looking to solve? What was their purpose? Did they have an objective? So, and some of these can be very high level, and some of them could be just really, really small and simple. We were practicing using this new particular technique, and we're going to give you a journal article about it. So sometimes it can be small, and sometimes it's big. And then again, what's the research question? What's the hypothesis? What's the thesis? What's the question that this particular journal article is addressing? Is it clear? Is it easy to understand? And here's the kicker. Is it worthwhile to ask? And again, this is where I want you to bring out your inner critic and to say, you know, why was this paper even written? Why did they choose to publish this? What was their one big thing in this journal article that they want you to take away? And it's okay to say, this journal article sounded great, but nothing really happened in it. That's okay. It's a valid criticism. You can say that as well. But is it clear? Is it easy to understand? Those are really, really key, because if it's written in such a way that you think that they're trying to snow you, um, maybe they are. Maybe they're trying to sort of befuddle you a little bit with um, really big words or lots of acronyms, or something isn't particularly well explained. Maybe they're only explaining it to people within their very little small corner of their discipline, and so that's a worthwhile thing to comment on. And again, what's the methodology? How did they set up and conduct the data collection? In sciences, the goal is always to be able to replicate their research. So were their methods clear? Were they biased? Why did they choose this technique? What are the advantages and drawbacks and limitations of this methodology? But the idea is always, in sciences particularly, that someone else with the exact same um, lab set up and the exact same criteria should be able to exactly replicate exactly what happened in this experiment. You're going to find that is replication does not push anybody in the social sciences or the humanities. Nobody else is going to be able to come along and replicate exactly what I did in my most recent book. It's a biography. They're going to come in with their own agenda, their own viewpoint. They're going to read perhaps some different things or find different things within the archive that I didn't see or that I didn't value, and they might write a completely different biography of the exact same person, and that can happen in the social sciences and humanities. In the sciences, replication is a big thing. But those are the questions, or at least some good questions, and you'll probably come up with others, or maybe your supervisor will have specific questions for you to ask around the methodology. I do recommend all three of those in terms of making sure that their methods were clear, were there biases. Also, did they explain why they chose this particular technique? That's a really good question. And also to critique it a little bit. What are the advantages of this methodology and what are the drawbacks and limitations? And what were the findings? Of course, this is something that historians don't do a lot of. We kind of move right from methodology to sort of, telling you the larger story. But in the sciences, the findings or the results are very, very important. So explain those main findings. And when you're taking your notes, if you want to write down a few of those main findings, that really helps you later, especially when you're going back to write your literature review. If there's any data, figures, or charts that you think might be worthwhile to copy and paste into your document, just so that it can kind of refresh your memory, then go ahead and do that. What was particularly surprising or noteworthy? That's a really good question because it asks you again to think critically, but also to think to really engage with it. It might be surprising or noteworthy to you just because you're kind of new to this particular discipline, but that's okay too because it'll change the way that you think about things. And then was the data fully explained, or was there anything that you didn't understand or was random or out of place? So these are some, again, that really active reading is full of questions. That's what active reading looks like. And then conclusions, next steps. When you're doing your kind of summary, and often I will do this. In fact, we were asked to do this when I was doing my PhD. Is that every article or book that we wrote, we did an individual review of each one, and it was a really great exercise in order to really make sure that we understood the particular article or the book. And so, yeah, so these are the steps that I went through, which is why I'm showcasing them too. And then final, what were the conclusions and next steps? So I would often summarize the conclusion. Did it line up with the question? Did it line up with the methods? Did it line up with the results? Did you agree or find it convincing? Why or why not? I always take notes on that as well, because that matters. I mean, that's the point of all of this research, right? Anyone who's publishing research is trying to convince you to think a particular way. So were they convincing? And then also, what are they planning to do next to take this study further? And what ways do you think they could take this study further, or that you could maybe take maybe they were at the end point, but you can see that as your jumping off point. What questions did the article raise for you? And then your final summation and critique, again, this comes if you're writing an individual document or your own individual notes, is that so you're taking your writing, you're asking your questions, you're talking about what's good about the paper, what's problematic about the paper, where the paper could maybe go next, or things that it caused you to think about, and that's perfectly fine, and then put that all together as part of your critique and your summation. So these are some of the techniques that I've successfully used, and then you finish. And so I wanted to end off the recording part. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to end the recording.